Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Being Patient Perspectives. I'm Deborah Kahn, founder of Being Patient. As you all know, we love talking to people who have been diagnosed with dementia. We learn a lot from that first person experience. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Rebecca Chopp. She has quite the CV, being currently Chancellor Emerita of the University of Denver. Previously, she was former president of both Colgate University and Swarthmore College. She was also a dean at Yale University of their divinity school. So quite an impressive CV. Rebecca was recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your work. I am so honored to meet you because I'm such a fan of your incredible program and your newsletter. And I read it all the time and forward it to all my friends.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. I often find it's inspirational to talk to people like you who have had obviously a hugely illustrious career. And instead of, with a diagnosis, you're really continuing to live life. But let me dial back a little bit so that people can become familiar with your story. Rebecca, can you tell us when you noticed something might be wrong? Obviously, you had a very, very demanding job that wasn't easy and where you were using your brain a lot. So tell us first signs.
Well, I have a bit of a strange story on this one in that I didn't notice anything other than all of a sudden I started sleeping. I had never slept much. Even as a small child, I would get up in the middle of the night and play with my dolls or read while my dad, who was also up in the middle of the night, was working on his books. And throughout my whole career, I always thought it was one of the great reasons I could accelerate my career. I had an extra day a week almost. And all of a sudden in 2018, I started sleeping not 4 hours a night, but 9 hours a night. So I went to my annual physical. And my doctor, wonderful primary care physician, said, "How are you doing?" I said, "I'm just doing great. Life's wonderful. I'm sleeping. I'm sleeping 9 hours."
Most people would think that's a great thing, right? I'm finally getting a full night's sleep.
Oh, it was wonderful. And then oddly, I had gotten lost on the way to her office. That was not a common practice. It's not been since. I'm still driving. But that day, I got lost. And she said, this is so rare, as we know, way too many primary care physicians do not pick up on these clues. She said, "I'm going to give you, if you don't mind, a short-term memory cognition exam." And I said, "Oh, sure, fine," knowing I'd pass it with flying colors, but I didn't. And that started the range of tests. And so I really hadn't noticed anything. It was that brilliant doctor, perceptive, who knew not only the signs about memory, but some of the other signs that can show up. Now, I will say my husband and I look back and we do see there were signs developing, not cognitive so much in my case, but social, anxiety, not wanting to go to events, being more tired, etc.
So kind of like a loss of motivation that wasn't there apparent before. Suddenly you just didn't feel like going places or socializing with people, which I could imagine is extremely difficult with somebody who's president of universities because it entails so much socialization.
Yeah, I mean, at University of Denver, in the city of Denver, and a very, active state, I was out 4 or 5 nights a week at galas, dinners, very involved in local politics, etc.
Would you just force yourself? Do you remember feeling like, God, I really just don't want to go, but you would just, get dressed and push yourself out the door?
What started happening, and my husband pointed this out, is that I began to find excuses not to go. I rationalized. So here's a good example. Our governor was elected, Governor Polis, and he was going to have an inaugural event. And of course, the Chancellor of DU had to attend. but it was going to be loud, and the loudness bothered me. And it was going to be late, and I was going to be tired, and there were going to be swarms of people. So I said to myself, oh, the new provost I had just hired, I really should get him to go in my place. He needs to meet people. Now, that was happening 2 or 3 times a week all of a sudden. So I would push myself, but I would also find excuses not to go or replacements.
Did you at that time notice that maybe people at work were picking up on unusual behavior that you were exhibiting, or were you able to mask it?
I was masking it.
So,
as many of the neurologists and neuropsychologists said, I probably, given my professions, probably have a pretty big cognitive reserve, and I was probably able to mask it.
so take us back to so you were given short-term memory tests that did you fail them or just not perform up to where you were expected?
Correct.
What did those results look like?
Correct. It was, I recently reviewed my whole medical history, and it was, I would pass on superior on some and be average and be failing on others. That was the series of tests. They sent me to the memory clinic, and there was a 4-hour test, and then they outsourced me to a well-known neuropsychologist for the 6 to 7 hour test. And it was that pattern. So it was that I was performing way below where I was expected, except in comprehension and understanding, which stayed very strong.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see how different, like the sleep to me is fascinating. Did a doctor or a neurologist ever explain that to you? Why? I mean, 4 hours is terrible usually, like
Terrible.
the fact that you could live on 4 hours of sleep. I don't know how you did that, but now that you were getting 7, 8 hours, whatever it was, did they explain why?
Not really on that one, although I have read that this is not uncommon, that people sleep more when they have Alzheimer's. And, who knows? I mean, I'm sure there is a scientific explanation.
How many years, Rebecca, has it been since you were diagnosed?
So I was diagnosed in spring of 2019.
Okay. And so it's
Almost 4.
relatively new journey. I mean, you had a very high profile job. How did you even approach the subject? If people at work didn't really know, you were able to mask it. That must have been really hard for someone in your position. You're a leader, to say, I'm having cognitive issues. How did you approach that?
It was incredibly scary and confusing. And I didn't want to take people into my confidence very early on because I didn't want to put them in that position. When you're the leader, you have to think about what kind of position am I putting a person in if I give them this kind of knowledge. And I did have a wonderful neurologist and a wonderful neurologist, especially the psychoneurologist really helped me, or neuropsychologist, I guess, really helped me with this. So I got the formal diagnosis in March. The academic year ends at the University of Denver in June. And my husband and I decided that I would step down that quickly. I probably could have kept it up for a year, but I had a very good provost who could step in, I knew, and I had a great team who could take over. I was very worried about making a mistake. The more I read, the more I realized. I mean, this is I don't know, $180 million budget or something. I mean, it's 20,000 people you're responsible for. I couldn't stand the thought of making a mistake. And also, I needed to spend time with my family. One neurologist had told me I probably have 3 years of good time before I started forgetting things and having trouble. So I was like, I only have 3 years. I wanted to spend time with my family, and I, wanted to have some time to spend with myself, because I had worked, pretty much 16 hours a day for at least 6 days a week for 20 years.
I want to get into how you're living with Alzheimer's, because you certainly are doing that very well. But before that, I think we've interviewed so many people who, just really kind of say, I can't do this anymore. For whatever reason, they don't disclose that they've been diagnosed with dementia. They step out of their job. A lot of people had very, like very high pressure jobs. Tell us a little bit. I think it would help people. How did you address that? How did you tell people that you've been diagnosed? And what was the reaction to that?
And that was really in your question. So we decided that I would step down. And so the first thing I did was to tell what is called my senior staff, the chief of staff and the various vice presidents. And we were a good team, and pretty much everybody cried. And the reaction is twofold: cry and say, I can't believe it. Just a lot of sadness and grief for me. And then I think probably as soon as they walked out of the room, incredible concern about what was going to happen. I hope that would be the natural way. I decided very early on I needed to tell the chair of the board. Private universities are really overseen by a board of trustees. I had a wonderful chairwoman named Denise O'Leary, and I will never forget her kindness. I went to her house. I called her and said, I have to see you now. And I went to her house and we sat on her porch. Her mother has Alzheimer's. And I told her. And she just grabbed my hand, and we sat there and cried and looked at the mountains. Then I told the board of trustees, and the most amazing thing, boards of trustees are these heroes and sheroes in life. I mean, they're high-powered people. That's why you put them on your board. And they had a similar reaction, as did my family and friends. So I was the only even negative reaction was this notion that I can't believe it. You don't have it. They've got to be wrong. And that's not really negative. That's disbelief. So I was very fortunate. When I went public, which was beyond that inner circle, I wasn't ready to use the word Alzheimer's.
What did you say?
I said complex neurological disorder.
Well, Alzheimer's is a scary word, and
it's so stigmatized.
And you stereotype it with a certain type of person and image in your mind.
Absolutely. Right? We can talk about it. I'm doing a book on my experience, and I think I may title it "Not My Grandmother's Alzheimer's."
That would be a great title. Right? And we should you've called it Art, Spirit, Body, Ways to Live While Dying from Alzheimer's, but I like the other title better, actually. I think that conveys, it's like it's living with Alzheimer's. It's not dying with, you're living. Okay, so now let's go to the next chapter, because I find this, okay.
But I do want to say, to be fair, because my grandmother and mother did have Alzheimer's, to be fair, people weren't diagnosed for so many years until very late. But the stigma is from then that and this is a stigma, that I immediately would be in a wheelchair, tied to my wheelchair, drooling, maybe sitting out in the hallway.
Yeah,
of the
absolutely. And, this is also what we gain from these interviews that we do, is there's a lot of life. Diagnosis doesn't mean death. There's a decade, of good life to live, where you are a contributing member of society for a long time, and that's what we gain from talking to people like you. We're putting a different face of Alzheimer's. So tell us a little bit. Okay, so you stepped down from your position. You called it, a what did you call it again? A
complex. Okay,
neurological.
Somebody gave it,
disorder or something.
Neurological disorder or something. Okay. Somebody gave me that language.
Okay, so you're having the complex, and then you stepped down. You probably had what, a month left.
Yeah, maybe 3. Yeah.
Okay, and that must have been scary in itself, because normally people who are retiring without a brain disorder, that's a scary thing no matter what. So
Yeah,
your identity
exactly.
is so wrapped up in your job, especially someone like you who has gone from different universities and been a leader.
Yeah.
So what was that like? Was it lonely? Were you unsure
Well,
about whether you made the right decision?
no, I never questioned. Again, my concern would be that if I was to progress more rapidly, like one neurologist predicted, I would start making mistakes, and the stakes were way too high in the kind of job I had. And I also want to say I was fortunate, extremely fortunate, and most people aren't, that I could retire.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, this is the other
Yep.
thing we must talk about, is the social inequities with this disease.
Absolutely.
Terrible. But I,
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen this disease ruin people's finances and their lives and their careers. And, it's a heavy, heavy toll for a
it's
lot of people.
absolutely. So
So,
yes, it was, I was very confused about what I was going to do. My son used to joke, and everyone agreed with him, that I'd never retire. And people thought I wouldn't, and I didn't think I would. I thought I'd be a chancellor 5 more years, teach for another 5, and then, who knows what. But all of a sudden, I had to face retirement. And, retirement still has its own stigma, right? What am I going to do? It wasn't so much identity for me. I mean, I didn't question that. It was you get all these habits. You're used to waking up at 4:30, getting on email, seeing all these people. So, the body and mind is wired in a certain way. And so what was going to replace that? What was going to keep me busy? I've never been one to sit still. So I was very, very, very concerned about that. And luckily, at that point, I was living in a condo downtown, and my sister, Kathy, was in the same condo. And we just happened to have condos in the same building, and she stepped in. And so we did, we went to the mountains. We're hikers. It was summer. I did a lot of hiking, did a lot of working out, did a lot of physical activity, and tried to sort it out.
well, what I love is when we first turned on this video, I noticed Rebecca behind her. I was like, who is that adorable baby? So this is true proof that when diagnosed with Alzheimer's, you can still learn new things. Rebecca painted that picture. It's your what did you say it was, nephew or
Grandnephew.
of
His
her
name is
grandnephew?
Kairos. Mhm.
And the most amazing thing is she's never been an artist, which I mean, you probably were like me. When I take pen to paper, it doesn't look very nice. Like, how did you tell us a little bit about how you launched a painting career?
Well, and I think this notion that you just mentioned, that you can, but also that you must. You must learn new things in these early stages. That keeps the neuroplasticity in your brain. It feeds your soul. It's easy to sit around and be depressed with this disease. It's easy to ask those questions and get into despair. The only antidote to that is to build up the other side. Cohen's beautiful phrase about light breaking through the cracks. You can focus on the darkness, or you can focus on the light. So learning is a great way. So what happened to me was a friend, her name is Frances, called me after she learned. I told her, and then she called me back and said, I'm flying to Denver. You're going to learn to paint. She had been a college president, became a consultant, but painting was her hobby. And I laughed and laughed. She said, nope, get 2 friends and we're going to go paint. She got a cabin, and I thought, well, this was going to be good. They could paint. I took my sister and a friend, Serene, and they're kind of wild and creative. And I thought, well, they'll paint, the 3 of them. I'll hike and I'll do the cooking. Frances would hear none of that. We all had to paint. So she kind of forced me into it, and I kind of had a temper tantrum for probably the first time in my life. I didn't want to do this, but she got me to do it. She and I did 2 good paintings together. I came back. My sister said, let's keep going. I found great teachers. The teacher I had, Matt, who led me to this kind of painting, realism, is just phenomenal. And I discovered that when I was painting, I couldn't think about my Alzheimer's. And sometimes I could feel my mind stretch. And I loved it. And I didn't worry over much about the products. I mean, this I think is pretty good. His version of this was far greater, but I didn't care about that. It was the doing and the learning.
Absolutely. So I love that notion. And we've heard other people say this as well. It's like, we interviewed a gentleman from the UK who rides his bicycle across the country because he says when he gets on his bike, he leaves Alzheimer's behind.
Yeah.
And I love that notion. It's like, there are places and areas that you can take yourself into where your identity is not Alzheimer's, it becomes something else. It's really powerful.
Right. And I think there's lots of research about flow and meditative practices, and, all mute. Some people find it through music, some through gardening. My father, who did not have Alzheimer's, but had he was an entrepreneur with a bunch of jobs. He restored cars, antique cars. And I remember him saying, when I get that wrench in my hand, I forget all about construction. So I think this is good brain health to create spaces you can go to that stress and that worry and that fear is not there.
I mean, you've taken yourself, I'm looking at these paintings behind you and thinking, no one would ever believe that you weren't a painter. I was like, you must have artistic, talent in your family. Like, that looks like it, it's amazing what you've done.
Well, I think there's a wonderful book, and I'm just going to campaign on this for a minute, by Betty Edwards, Drawing on the Right Side of Your Brain. And the science has been a little disproven that there's a right side and a left side, but the point is still correct. Children dance and draw and sing before they read and write. We all have that talent, but we don't teach it, we don't cultivate it, etc. So it's a good side of every human being. Everybody can be creative, and it really is, I think, helpful psychologically and spiritually, but I'm convinced it's also helpful for those little neurons and things in the brains.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about your familial link to Alzheimer's. You mentioned your mom had Alzheimer's.
Yes.
And then, and who else in your family?
I think both my grandmothers had it. I come from a rural background in Kansas, very rural. And so my mother was diagnosed with, and I never get this right, I think it's a block, Lewy body. But that wasn't, the diagnosis was Alzheimer's. It was only one of my neurologists who said, I think it may have been Lewy's body, because she had a lot of the hallucination and paranoia. Yeah. But who knows, because again, she was in rural Kansas too. But she was diagnosed in her early 70s. I believe it started showing probably by mid 60s. We noticed signs, but again, she was very intelligent, and we did take her in for tests, and I think she figured out how to handle those tests until much later.
With a mom who had Alzheimer's and, probably grandparents, did you fear Alzheimer's? Did you ever think,
Yes.
because I mean, I know once my mom was diagnosed, I think about, wow, I might be on that road too. You can't help it, right? But did you?
There is nothing I feared more. I mean, that and kind of what I called madness. And I'm sorry to use that term, but that was the term that I kind of grew up with. And it's a variation to me. I feared that more. I remember at times, we all do these kind of things. I'm willing to die of this, I'm willing to die of that, but oh my God, please, I don't want to die from Alzheimer's. That was my literally worst fear about getting older. So I was surprised with my diagnosis, but not completely surprised.
Now, are you noticing changes? I mean, it's been since 2019 you were diagnosed, so it's been a few years. Are you noticing any changes, or do you feel like you have control because you're actually learning new things and, or has your husband noticed any significant changes since you've retired?
Yeah, I think definitely my memory is getting worse, and I was the memory of the family. I remembered everything. So that's hard because he's not been used to playing that role. And right now we're trying to get how to calendar straight. We've tried everything and we cannot get it, and I can't remember. I was scared to death of forgetting this. I had it written in sticky notes everywhere. So I think I certainly notice memory. I continue to have a lot of social phobia, loud noise, all that comes with Alzheimer's. I used to have a phenomenal memory in terms of the capacity for understanding concepts. Memories, different types, and there's one type of memory remembers dates and times, another type of memory comprehension. My memory was so good that I could quote paragraphs from Hegel or philosophers or theologians. That's my background. Now, when I read a book, even if I take notes, 3 or 4 days later, it's very hard for me to remember what's in that book. Now, when I return to it, I can skim it and it comes back. Comprehension, understanding, people talking to me, understanding concepts. I'm in a number of book groups. When I review the book and I can have a good, rigorous discussion. But I'm certainly noticing things. But like I said, I'm still driving. I'm not driving into the city. My son lives nearby and he drives me into Denver, but I drive around my little rural suburban area I live in.
Let's talk a little bit about your outlook on life today. I mean, you've now become, in a sense, an advocate. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have told me, you've got to meet Rebecca, you've got to meet Rebecca. So you're carving a name in this space. What is it that you're trying to do with advocacy?
Well, I think there are two things I'm trying to do. And of course, about the Voices of Alzheimer's group, which I'm a co-founder of. And so we're very much trying to raise awareness, like your group and all other groups. We're very focused on policy issues. Right now, we're very focused on CMS, Medicare, and getting them to follow FDA rulings and supply, approve Medicare, so the insurance companies can also follow for the drugs. So that's very important. So, stigma, education, advocacy, justice, to me, that is about justice. It is unjust that so many people can't get treatment. But I think the other thing I would add that I'm personally extremely passionate about is a brain healthy lifestyle. Because I believe, based on the research I've done and the researchers I've talked to, until we get a cure, the most we can hope for is drugs that can help slow the symptoms and a brain healthy lifestyle. And I believe that everyone should adopt a brain healthy lifestyle, like everyone should adopt a heart healthy lifestyle.
Absolutely.
If you worry about Alzheimer's now, you should already be doing the things that are proven that are good for your brain. Brain is a part of your body, of course.
Rebecca, do you participate in any clinical trials, or have you in the past?
I've tried to. Denver's a bit of a desert for those. mainly most of the clinical trials that I have found that I've been interested in are on the East Coast or the West Coast or near major metropolitan areas.
Yeah.
So I would be more than happy to do a clinical trial if I found one in my local area.
Okay. And any advice, final advice for people who might be just entering this journey, worried about their memory or just diagnosed? What would you tell them today?
Well, I'd say, first of all, it's learn all you can about Alzheimer's, make your own judgments. We don't even know what causes this disease. So we're all in it together trying to figure this out. Brain healthy lifestyle, creativity, exercise. There's lots of interesting research on canine companionship. So get a dog like I did and walk and run with your dog and play with your dog. Do weights, do ballet, whatever you want to do. It doesn't matter. Do what you love. Diet, of course, there is the MIND diet, which is a variation of the Mediterranean diet. Diet is extremely important. I think some kind of spirituality for me has also been important. This disease brings up the most ultimate questions. And I think having time, again, to spend not only in the lamentation side, expressing sorrow about this, having this disease, but also in the light side, in abiding in the light and building up the spirituality. You can live a fuller life for your families, for your friends, for you, if you do some things that are good and fun, or as my neurologist said, live with joy.
That's such great sage advice, and spoken from a true divinity academic herself. It really carries a long way. So thank you so much, Rebecca. I'm so glad that we met. I know that hearing from someone such as yourself is enormously helpful to people impacted by this disease. And it's really such a pleasure to speak to you. And we'll be in touch. So thank you.
Thank you.
So if you missed any of this interview or you want to know more, go to beingpatient.com. We'll repost it. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter. That's when we tell you about talks like the one we had with Rebecca. Thanks everyone for watching. See you next time.